We'll start with what the user experience looks like. So if you're familiar with Citrix Workspaces or Horizon or uh, Amazon App Streaming, Leo Stream, any of those platforms that are out there today, this will be very similar. There's two ways to connect into a RAS environment. So all these users that are sitting at home on their laptops or sitting in the office on their workstation or on a thin client can connect with any HTML5 compliant browser, which is pretty prevalent on most devices these days. Um, all you have to do is put in the IP address or the domain name of your gateway. Remember, the gateway is the door. If you have networking infrastructure in front of the gateway, such as load balancing or public IP that's DNATed to an internal network, then whatever the entry point is, that front-facing IP address, you just type that in, which I've done here, and I'm going to log in with my domain credentials. And then I see all of the applications and desktops that my administrator has built for me. You can launch these applications right in the browser, and they'll show up in the little taskbar here at the bottom of the browser. So you can do multiple applications very easily. You can switch between them. You can minimize them. We've added this taskbar here. You can launch more applications and hide this launcher. It's a pretty good user experience for being in the browser. You can use your default sound devices. So if you have a soft phone application, you can use your speakers and your microphone. If you have a printer sitting next to you, you can even use the printer through a virtual printer mapping process that we have that lets the print job come to the endpoint and then let you select the printer when it's ready to print it out right next to you. Um, we also have the ability to transfer files into and out of the system through the browser and some basic clipboard access. From a full desktop perspective, let me switch from applications to desktops. We don't have the taskbar at the bottom of the screen anymore, so we moved it over here to the side, over to this little action bar, which you can move or minimize to kind of get rid of the space it's taking. You can also maximize that screen and get rid of the full browser wrapper around your workspace. So this is a really great way to connect. You wouldn't even know that you're working in a browser. You still have access to those sound devices, the printer, and file transfer like you normally would. And of course, everything that the application is using on the host itself is available to you. It's a pretty good user experience without having to install anything on the endpoint at all. The other option, let me sign out of this one, is to use our native client. And I mentioned that before. We have a dedicated client, very similar to the Horizon client or the Citrix Workspace client, that gives us as close to a an operating system seamless experience on that particular operating system. And we have native clients for Windows, Linux, Mac, iOS, Android, and Chrome. They'll see the same applications. This time when you launch them, though, they launch in a separate window and they show up in the Windows taskbar. So they show up in Task Manager. So this is a little more seamless to what users might be expecting with Windows applications. You also have more device support. So um, multiple printers can be accessed right through the application. So you can choose to print to your color printer or to the laser printer right inside the application. Full device support. So if you have things beyond the sound devices, you have USB devices that need to be used by your applications in this remote environment, those devices can be brought with you into the session as well. Webcams, multiple speakers, things like that could all be brought in at the same time. Also, drag and drop is seamless. So you can drag application, you could drag a bitmap image, for example, into your email program that's running on the host, and it'll add it as an attachment. You can open a file explorer locally and a file explorer on the host and drag and drop files back and forth between them as if they were all running locally. So it's a really great user experience from the um, to try and be as seamless as possible with the operating system. I'm going to leave this open, and then let's flip over and take a look at what the administrative side looks like. All right. So this is one of the servers that's running inside an existing RAS solution. If I want to take a peek at what this solution looks like, I can see my roles here, my gateway roles and my connection broker roles. I can also see some hosts. I can also see a connection. What we call a provider is a connection to a hypervisor. So it's a provider of virtual machines, right? So you can see here that I have a gateway running on two machines, a connection broker role running on two machines. So this would be one of those diagrams I showed you where there were two machines for redundancy and resiliency. So that's what I have running in this environment. Okay. And while we're looking at this application, we just call the admin console or the RAS console. It is the primary and really the sole tool for managing and deploying your whole infrastructure. Everything that you can do with RAS, you do through this application. We'll take a look at it. Over here on the left side, we have what we call categories. There's about 13 or so. I'm just going to scroll down a couple at a time. These take you into various contextual areas of your environment or the settings or the operational um, configuration so you can make changes to the environment. Okay. One thing I will notice, or I'd like you to notice, is that as I'm clicking through these various things, and the screen changes, it's not very complex. You can see that we don't have menus and nested submenus. It's a pretty thin interface. The good news is it's very easy to learn. It's not a complex product at all. It's very easy to figure out where to go to make changes to things. It's also very easy to understand what those settings are because they're apparent. They're right in front of you, and they're not complicated um, to change. We're going to start looking at the farm category, and I'll tell you some of the things you can do here. And we'll walk through just a few more of these that would be a typical administrator experience. As you set up an environment, you try and configure apps and desktops for your users and what their user experience would look like. So the farm category is all about building your infrastructure. So how many gateways, how many connection brokers, it also, as part of that infrastructure, helps you configure the hosts where your applications are running. So your RDSH servers or your terminal servers, your connections to Azure, if you're doing that to run virtual machines there, connections to physical PCs that could be sitting in a remote office. So all of those pieces are considered your RAS infrastructure and your content hosts that users are going to connect to. And you manage them all from here. For example, I have two gateways. If I decided that I needed a third gateway, I simply come down into this tree view, select gateway, have a virtual machine or a physical machine provisioned on the network running the Windows Server operating system. And then I click add, put in a host name, and RAS will push our software to that machine, set up the firewall rules, and turn it into another gateway. That same push mechanism is used throughout our product. So you don't have to go to each server and download installers, run them from a command line. You don't have to look up command line syntax or anything like that. Everything is done right here from the admin console. I want to add a second connection broker. I just go to connection brokers, make sure that I have the machine provisioned on the network, and I tell RAS where it is. RAS will push our software to it and configure it as a connection broker, copy all the settings from the other connection brokers, and bring it into the farm under that role. Same thing is true for your session host. So if I have an RDSH server or a terminal services machine, which is a multi-session Windows server machine that's going to run my applications or my shared desktops, I provision that machine on the network. I install all my applications. But I don't have to do anything else. I don't have to configure any Windows features. I don't have to configure the firewall rules. I just come here to RAS and say, I've got a machine on the network. It's got my apps on it. I want you to turn it into a session host. So I go add. I can add multiple machines here, and I have a really simple wizard that will do that for me. RAS will copy our installer, deploy all of our components as needed, set up the firewall rules, set up the remote desktop users group, everything that's needed, including turning on the RDS feature and the session host role. So all those RDS configuration pieces are also managed by our push installation. So you don't have to do any of that. A few more things you can do here besides add additional infrastructure machines or content hosts. Also, virtual desktops or physical desktops. You can group them together into host pools. Um, Organize your workload. You may have applications for engineers compared to applications for your marketing team that you want to segregate into different groups of hosts. All of that is done here in the farm category. Certificates that are used by the environment for your gateways to encrypt things are managed here. We use self-signed certificates by default when you start building the farm. You can generate your own. You can also import a corporate certificate if you have one for your corporate domain, or integrate with Let's Encrypt for domain validated free certificates. Uh, you can also manage the look and feel a little bit. So there's some theme settings here that you can manage. So basic branding of that web client. There's also some settings here that you can manage as a group. So if you have multiple identity providers, multiple domains for authentication, things like that, you can also use themes to segregate those things to change authentication settings. Some of the additional features you can also turn on here. You can manage logging, URL redirection, um, app attached packages, and some of those larger features. Connections to ABD, for example, are all configured here in the farm category. Once you have your infrastructure in place and you've got your RAS components plus your hosts with your applications in your farm, the next step is to identify the apps and the desktops that are on those hosts that your users need to be able to get to. And we do that through the publishing category. The publishing category allows us to identify all those resources that my users want to get to. And you can see that I have a few selected here already. Okay. To add resources, you simply run through a simple wizard to find them on those hosts and make them available to your users. So I'll run through it very quickly. You can publish apps, desktops, app containers, web apps, which is essentially the default browser with a URL, kind of takes you through this wizard a little bit quicker. A shared document on a host, maybe an Excel workbook that a lot of people work on at the same time, for example. Also, internal network file shares. So things that you would normally have to map a drive for inside your network can be exposed directly to the users through a RAS securely. I'll run through an application real quick from a session host. Any of the other types of hosts you have in your environment would be shown here. We also allow central configuration of apps that are running on the endpoints. So if you have corporate endpoints, for example, that all have an application deployed, you can centrally manage it in the settings for it here and make it available to users through the same dashboard, which is great for things like kiosks, where you're blocking the user's access to get to their desktop directly. You can still provide app access that are running locally on the endpoint. I'll look at the session host for now, and I'll look at all the applications that are installed on the session hosts that are in this particular pool. And RAS will go interrogate all the machines in that pool and give me a list of all the apps that it found. I usually like to do Paint and Notepad, of course, because those are great demos. I'll do Paint again. You can select as many as you want at the same time, and RAS will publish them all at the same time. Now, we use a two-phase or a two-stage publishing model. The first is to identify the resource on the host. Once you have that configured, the second is to release it to your users. This step here is, should my users be able to publish or be able to access that application? So this is the releasing it to the users phase. If it's enabled, then this resource will be available to users, the very next user that logs in. If it's disabled, then any user that logs in won't see it on their application listing. And if it's in maintenance mode, then they'll see it. It'll be dimmed just slightly, and you can configure a message, such as a maintenance message that says, this app is down, while we upgrade it. It'll be back on Monday, things like that. I'll go ahead and make it enabled for this example. I get a summary screen, and then the system is updated, and I'll save my changes. So what I just did is I published another instance of Paint, and that wizard walked me through all of the values I needed to set these settings. Notice this was the application settings. I didn't have to enter those at all. RAS went and pulled those from the host for me, but I could change them. If I need to add command line parameters, I need to specify an INI file or an ODBC connection file or something like that. I can now administratively go tweak this and change it. There's also some settings I can modify here to change the user experience.